I'd like to introduce Mr. Tom Donahue from CH2M Hill to give remarks. Tom?
Thanks, everybody. Great to be in Atlanta. I want to echo what Keith Parker said the other night. Take MARTA. There's no better and safer way to get out to the airport. I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about CH2M Hill. What I thought I would do is just tell you how I came to the company. I started in consulting in 2000 after being the finance director at Washington Metro. During my time at Booz Allen, they gradually transitioned into more of a defense and intelligence contractor. They looked at our business, and over time they determined it wasn't a good fit for them. So they could have let our business die, but instead of doing that, they gave us the opportunity to search for a new partner. So like you, at some of your transit agencies, we put together a qualification package and a score sheet. We interviewed all of the A&E firms, all of the major ones in this country and some international firms. We settled on 3 that we thought were the best fit for us. CH2M Hill was one of them. We brought our scoring criteria to our senior management team, and we took a vote, and the vote was unanimous. And we all chose CH2M Hill as our new partner. The reason we did that was the size of the firm. At the time, it was about 20,000 people, which is a great fit for us. It meant we could find whatever we needed in-house, from a nuclear scientist to a waste disposal expert. The size of the transportation team. At the time, it was about 1,500 people. Coming from Booz Allen, where it was very small, this was a relief for us because they understood the challenges and opportunities in the state and local market. And third, the size of the transit and rail team at the time at CH was about 150 people. So that was equivalent to what we were bringing with us. So we came in as equal partners. We were later pleased when they acquired Halcro, which brought us an international footprint, and we now have about 4,000 transportation professionals around the globe, and the leading tunnel design capabilities that Halcro brought with them. But in addition to the size and the numbers, there were things like this little yellow book, which we thought was pretty hokey at the time when they first showed it to us. It's got little cartoons in it and little sayings written by one of the founders. But then we started seeing it in all of the offices. The CEO has a copy. It's in the boardroom. And there are lots of little sayings in here. I thought I'd read one of them if I brought my glasses. Just a second. So things like, let us be flamboyant when it comes to dreaming and thinking, conservative in our personal habits, while doing interesting, innovative things inside and outside the firm. It's filled with stuff like this, and this convinced us that CH2M Hill was the right fit for us, and I'm pleased to report after 3 years that I think that's true. And I'm pleased to be their Director of Rail and Transit in the Americas. Very pleased to work with many of you, and I'd be even more pleased to work with all of you. So thank you. You have a great morning.
Good morning. Good morning. I would like to introduce our moderator for this panel, Mr. Jack Basso. Peter Jack Basso is a nationally recognized expert on transportation finance and policy. He is a senior advisor in the Strategic Consulting Group at Parsons Brinckerhoff. Mr. Basso's career includes leadership roles in the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, as well as a senior position in the U.S. Department of Transportation. Please welcome Mr. Basso.
Thank you, and good morning to all of you. And it's good to be in Atlanta. It's always good to be somewhere other than Washington, D.C., so let me say that. Well, first of all, we're pleased to have you here, and I'm particularly pleased to have the opportunity to moderate this panel and to have a very distinguished group of panelists. And I'll just briefly mention them. I've been asked not to do bios, so I'll just do the one-liners. Administrator Michael Huerta of the Federal Aviation Administration. is here, as well as James Cole, who is the Deputy General Counsel of the U.S. Department of Transportation, and Camille Hazier, I think I pronounced that correctly, the Director of Civil Rights for the department, and we also have David Kim from the Federal Highway Administration here. So what I'm going to do is do something a little different than what you might expect. We're not going to do formal presentations. We're not going to do PowerPoints or any of that sort of thing, because we don't want any sleep apnea engaged in here, so we won't do that. What I'm going to do is ask the panelists a series of questions, and we'll do that for a period of time on a range of different topics that I hope will be of interest to you. One of the things you might think that we overlooked, and we're not, DBE is a burning subject for this conference, but there is a panel that follows this exclusively, delving in depth on the disadvantaged business programs. So we'll probably dispense with that at this session. You'll get a lot more of it later. So with that having been said, I'm going to go back up here and ask the first question, and that will end up actually going to David Kim first, and then Michael Porta, because I'm going to focus on reauthorization. All right, can you hear me all right? Great. All right. One of the burning questions, obviously, at the moment is, particularly on the surface transportation programs, highways and transit, the question of reauthorizing those programs, and probably as important, not only reauthorizing, but finding a way to pay the bills that have already been committed. As all of you probably aware, there's a whole steaming crisis which may well cause payments to the states and to the transit agencies to be dramatically slowed down because the cash flows are not working at the moment. So that having been said, what I'm going to do is first ask David Kim, and I may ask James Cole as well, to chime in on this, their perspectives on, A, how are we going to address the short-term crisis? How are we going to address the long-term need for reauthorization in the absence of money, which is a major ingredient? And what are their perspectives on what we all can do to help this process? So maybe I'll start with you, David.
Well, thank you, Jack, and good morning. It's great to see you all, and I'd like to thank Comto for the invitation to join you. A couple things to highlight. First, there's the short-term problem, and then there's a long-term problem. The short-term problem is that the Highway Trust Fund is in dire straits right now, and Secretary Fox has been sounding the alarm bell since the very beginning of this year to warn states and transit agencies and others at the local level that the Highway Trust Fund account balances are dwindling. As you know, there are two accounts within the trust fund, the highway account and the mass transit account. The highway account is projected to reach a dangerously low balance of below $4 billion within the next month. And the mass transit account will also reach a low balance of $1 billion shortly thereafter. We have indicated to state DOTs and others that we will be forced, or we will be compelled to implement cash management procedures on August 1st if Congress does not take action to address the looming cash shortfall in the Highway Trust Fund. Fortunately, there is action on Capitol Hill to do that. The House is taking up a bill today that would provide enough funding for 8 months for the trust fund, and also to extend the current MAP 21 authorization until next June. The Senate is also working on a similar, although different plan. So the good news is there are efforts underway to address the looming cash shortfall, which, if unaddressed, would very negatively hurt state DOTs and transit agencies and local governments as well, because we would have to slow down reimbursements for projects. On the long-term side, that's the big question. What's going to happen when the MAP 21 authorization expires on September 30th? Different plans underway. The Senate Environment and Public Works Committee has marked up a bill. The House has not. The administration has put forth a plan called the Grow America Act, which is a multi-year, it's a 4-year, $302 billion reauthorization package. It's very comprehensive. It's the President and Secretary's vision for investment in 21st century transportation infrastructure. We feel it has a lot of merit, and hopefully folks on the Hill will be able to take parts of it or all of it and incorporate it into their reauthorization proposal this year.
James?
Thank you again for inviting me as well. I was at the Comto conference last year, so I'm excited to be joining you for a second year in a row. David, I think, gave a great overview of the surface reauthorization issues and the short-term issues, so I only have a little bit more to add. I'd like to give you a little bit more detail on the four-year plan. As David mentioned, it's $302 billion. Of that, $200 billion would be allocated for highways, $72 billion would be allocated for FTA, and then $20 billion would be allocated for FRA. As David mentioned, there's got to be negotiation and give and take on a bill that finally reaches the president's desk because it's got to get through Congress. But there are three, as our FTA acting administrator mentioned yesterday, there are three key priorities that we think any bill should address. The first is the infrastructure deficit. Our infrastructure is greatly in need of repair. The second is there is incredible growing demand. So not only do we need to repair their infrastructure, but there is incredible demand. On the transit systems, we had 10 billion trips last year. And when you think about the fact that we have an $86 billion backlog in repairs and replacements that are needed in the transit system, it's incredibly critical that we deal with the growing demand. And then last but not least, we believe any reauthorization bill should have ladders of opportunity that help Americans get to the middle class. One thing I would like to add, we're gonna have a DBE program shortly after this panel, but one of the things I'm very excited about in our Grow America Act is that we have stated that we're going to use existing funds to create a DBE program in federal railroads. Those of you, I'm sure you're aware, we're gonna, on our next panel, we'll talk about the fact that we have a DBE program in federal highways, we have a DBE program in federal transit, and also in federal aviation, but we do not have a DBE program in federal railroads, so I'm very excited that we're launching a disparity study, because if the disparity study shows that disadvantaged businesses are being underutilized, we will put a DBE program in the federal railroads. That's very exciting because, as I just mentioned, our Grow America Act provides for $20 billion to federal railroads over the next 4 years. And if we put in a DBE program that's consistent with the programs we have right now, that's $2 billion over the next 4 years for disadvantaged businesses. So I think the reauthorization is very important. We're very excited about the proposal moving forward. It's great to hear that it looks like we're at least going to try and get the Highway Trust Fund funded at least for the next 8 months. So hopefully we can move forward on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Following on the theme of reauthorization, I'm going to turn to Michael Huerta. The FAA's reauthorization, I believe, comes up in January, if I remember correctly. Yeah, and so with that having been said, I'd like him to give us some prognostications about where we might head with that, because it's actually very important.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. And again, I'd like to express my thanks to Comto for the invitation to be here. The FAA is, of course, not covered by the surface authorization that's really taking up a lot of time and a lot of attention in the Congress this year, but it is something that we in the leadership of the FAA are watching very carefully, the surface reauthorization, because of what it will suggest when our authorization comes up in the next fiscal year. Our current authorization expires at the end of September in 2015, and we, like our surface counterparts, had a very difficult time to reauthorization last time around. Our last reauthorization was done in 2012. It was a 4-year bill. It picked up the previous year and then the subsequent 3 years, but we had gone 4.5 years without an authorization. And many in the construction community and the FAA's operating organizations as well really suffered as a result of having a number of short-term extensions that were very disruptive to contracting, very disruptive to operations, and we're hoping that we're not going to see that this time around. The FAA is a little bit different from the surface programs in one important respect. We are a grant-making agency. We give about $3.3 billion annually to airport grants, but the largest part of our operation of our agency is that we're also an operating entity as well. We operate the National Airspace System, and that requires us to hire and train a large number of air traffic controllers and technicians to support our infrastructure there. But it also means that we bear the responsibility for modernization of that program through a new technology deployment that we call NextGen. Reauthorization for us is essential to enable us to continue to invest in our nation's airport infrastructure and to keep on track this incredibly important modernization program of our air traffic system. We have been using radar-based technology that has served us very, very well for the last 50 years. And we're midstream in a transition to using GPS satellite-based technologies to manage air traffic. Why are we doing this? It gives us a much clearer view of what's happening in our airspace system, and it provides us the ability to actually handle more traffic more efficiently with no degradation in safety. And you can think of it this way. Radar gives you a picture that looks something like an impressionist painting. You have a good sense of what's going on, but it's based on points in time that give you not a high degree of precision of where any aircraft is. As a result of NextGen, it's like going from that impressionist painting to HD TV. You have a much clearer view of what's happening, and that means you can move airplanes closer together, and that's how you get more efficiency out of the system. We have just completed the build-out of the foundational technologies, and we are right now at the point of starting to deliver the huge benefits of this program, and it would be extremely disruptive if we were to face a lapse in authorization. And so we're watching what's happening in the surface authorization. We want them to get it done this year so that it will clear the way for FAA reauthorization to take place next year.
Thank you. James, I think I'm going to turn to you on this one. This is on the transit programs. How do you see not only this reauthorization, but the going forward process for enhancing and for increasing resources in the transit programs from the federal level? Where do you see that going, and what could we do that would be helpful to make that happen?
That's a great question. As I mentioned, the Grow America Act provides for $72 billion over the next 4 years. That is an incredible increase over the current funding in the FTA. As many of you know, when we think of the Highway Trust Fund, we think of it only funding the Highway Trust, but a portion of the Highway Trust Fund also funds our transit programs. A lot of money, we provided for a lot of money in First Starts, New Starts programs, which really go into addressing some of the infrastructure concerns we have at transit. We also are working through new programs to try and address the backlog. We've started some great programs with some of our local transit organizations. And so the Grow America Act builds on many of the new programs that we had in MAP 21. We intend to continue those programs and also top those programs up.
Thank you. Camille, I'm going to ask you kind of an overarching question, not so much directly on DBE, but on civil rights. The department, I know this personally, has come a long way since the Civil Rights Act of 1964, because I was there then, believe me. And what I'd like to get is your perspective, again, on what kind of 2 or 3 top things that you think we should be pursuing on the civil rights front as we go forward, on the, if you will, on the horizon of a major set of reauthorizations.
Very good question. Thank you all for having me this morning, and it's great to be here. This will be my perspective, since this is a question it's a great question, but I have to think a little bit. A lot of people will say when they meet me or members of my extended staff, what's civil rights and transportation? And what they don't put together real quickly is the most obvious is, of course, access to transportation. Not just for persons with disabilities, with our buses that drop down and our curb cuts, but for all of us who take advantage of those kinds of things. And of course, one of the ones that all of these are dear to our hearts as we move forward in the department, of course, is also having access to the money that James just mentioned and Kim for small businesses across the nation, both disadvantaged minority businesses and women businesses and small businesses who are not part of the program, to have access to these dollars to build the infrastructure of this nation. So going forward, I would say ladders of opportunity through our contracts, and certainly vigilance around making transportation, or continuing to make transportation accessible to all kinds of people who are part of the United States and also visitors to the United States, both in the sense of access for persons with disabilities as well as access with persons with different languages. This is very important to us too, because we are a nation of persons from all over the world, and so our expectation is that when you're serving the nation, you'll serve the nation in ways that people can access our services. So going forward, I would see these, my wish, of course, is that we would get an infrastructure bill to put everybody to work. That would be wonderful. So I think we'll keep pushing toward that, and at some point, I hope we'll realize it.
Thank you. I'm going to turn a question that I was given here in a little different direction. The question dealt with the gas tax, how we're going to deal with the gas tax. I'm not going to ask that question because anybody who's in Washington knows at the moment that is somewhat like the third rail of any other issue. What I would like to explore a little bit with whoever would like to take this on the panel, the question of alternatives to the gas tax. What are some of the areas we might research and explore? Not commit to, but simply research and explore for long-term revenue generation. The reason I ask that is, and I won't get into any detail, but clearly, if we keep going forward, A, we can't raise the gas tax, B, if we could, it's a deteriorating commodity because of fuel efficiency and many other things. So I want to just get some ideas about what we might be thinking about as we go forward.
Jack, I'll take a shot at your question, but I'll first preface it by saying that in the Grow America Act, we do offer a way to pay for the program. It would consist of business tax reform, which would yield roughly $150 billion in new revenue, one-time revenue, and on top of that, a continuation of the current gas tax, which would yield another roughly $150 billion, and so that adds up to a $302 billion package over 4 years. As far as alternative forms of revenue, that's a good question. A lot of different stakeholders have been exploring that. One idea that everyone has heard about is a mileage-based user fee. We're not here to endorse it, but it's been talked about at the state level. The state of Oregon has a pilot program underway to test the viability of a mileage-based user fee or a vehicle miles traveled fee or a tax where you pay by the mile, 5 cents a mile, 10 cents a mile, whatever it might be. There are a variety of technical and legal and privacy issues to address before instituting a mileage-based user fee system, but again, a lot of states or some states are taking a look at that, and we'll see what the results will yield in the coming years.
And I'd add, just as another alternative, if you go through the Grow America Act, we talk about some tolling alternatives, and I've had a number of folks on the Hill say they completely disagree with tolling, and the Obama administration is proposing tolling, and that's not true. What we have proposed in Grow America is that to the extent that states decide that they want to bring in tolling to help with state infrastructure projects, we would not be opposed to that, and we would take into consideration state requests. So the Grow America Act does not propose or endorse federal tolling. It simply says, as an alternative, to the extent that states want to rely upon tolling within their states, that's an option that the state can use. So that's just another alternative I put out there, and also dispel a myth that there is something federal tolling that we propose in Grow America.
Yeah, let me just add one editorial comment to that because I think that's a good subject. The issue really is the interstate system, which generally the law prohibits tolling except some very specific small pilots along the way. What's been under consideration is opening up the discretion to the states, and it would be their responsibility, and the reason being they own the system. So taking a federal roadblock out of their way to the extent they want to try to exercise that authority, and we'll see where all of that goes because it's kind of interesting.
You know, I'm not going to talk about the gas tax and the surface fund, but just to observe that in the aviation trust fund, we're dealing with a similar problem. The Aviation Trust Fund is comprised of two major sources of revenue. It's taxes that we all pay on our airline tickets, which are levied on commercial travel, and fuel taxes, which are levied on the different varieties of aviation fuel. And one of the things that we have seen over the past few years has been diverging paths between how the revenues are derived in the Aviation Trust Fund versus the cost of investing in infrastructure and operating the system. The best example of that is the fuel tax component. We have been, as a result of the investments in NextGen that we're making, that has resulted in air travel being much more efficient. And what that translates to for a user of the system is they're burning less fuel. So effectively, what we are paying for are investments that are reducing our ability to collect fuel tax revenue. Now, that's good public policy. We want to reduce fuel burn because it reduces cost. We want to reduce emissions, but the long-term problem that it sets up is that we need to figure out how do we replace it with something that more closely ties to the operation of the system. President Obama has proposed a segment fee in his last couple of budgets. That would be a fee that would be charged on users of the system. And the feeling is that it starts to address the question of better linking how we derive revenues into the Aviation Trust Fund and the cost of operating that system for aviation users. Not surprisingly, this has not been a wildly popular proposal over the last few years. But I do think that what the president is trying to start is a conversation that we need to get these things back in alignment. If we're going to say that transportation is supported through trust funds and user fees, how we derive revenues and then how we operate these systems and the cost side need to be in alignment with one another. And I think that that is certainly the case in the Aviation Trust Fund, and I believe the case in the Surface Trust Fund as well.
All right, now, Michael, since we're on that topic, let me turn and ask you this question. The AIP program, the Airport Improvement Program, is very integral to the airports and the recipients on that end. What do you see as the prospects for the Airport Improvement Program for the future, and what directions might we be trying to move?
Yeah, the Airport Improvement Program is funded entirely out of the Airport and Airway Trust Fund. It's about a $3.35 billion a year program, an infrastructure program. Like its highway counterpart, it has a formula-derived or allocated part of the program, and then a discretionary program through which we fund large, major airport improvement projects. It is supplemented by a second authority that we give to airports, which is passenger facility charges. These are charges that are up to $4.50 that are levied on tickets by individual airports. These are locally derived revenues that they can use to support airport development programs. The president's budgets over the last few years have proposed to reduce the AIP portion and to increase the authority of the airports to levy passenger facility charges. This is widely supported by the large gateway airports that have significant ability to raise passenger facility charges. And they like the ability to, in their view, have more predictability about what their infrastructure requirements would be. And we need to find the right balance between providing a base AIP program that provides the levels of access that Camille was talking about earlier, and a base level of infrastructure improvement in airports, while at the same time generating more revenues. Because like all of our infrastructure challenges across the country, we need to invest more in infrastructure, and airports are no exceptions. I think that this is going to present a difficult question for Congress as they consider reauthorization. The airlines are not supportive of any increase to the passenger facility charges, but they also have changed their business model in terms of how they price tickets. We all pay baggage fees, we pay change fees, we pay sometimes for seats and pillows and all of the amenities on flights. And all of these revenues that airlines derive, which are not included in the ticket, are not subject to the ticket tax. And so you get the picture here. You have essentially a ticket tax revenue stream that is flat, and you have, and the airlines are basically opposing any ability for an airport to raise revenues locally through an increase in the passenger facility charge. And so we've started to have conversations with all of the stakeholders in the aviation industry to point out, okay, everybody, let's get together. We're all fighting over pieces of the program, but let's talk about the problem we're trying to solve. There are things that we can agree on. We have to increase the investment in infrastructure. We have to keep NextGen on track. Everybody wants a safe and efficient air traffic system. This is what it costs. Let's sit down and have an honest conversation about how best to pay for that. And I think that's going to be critical as we go into reauthorization next year.
Thank you. Let me turn to a couple of other things as we go forward here. I will segue a little bit into the DBE program in this regard. PFCs, Michael, do you have any thoughts on the DBE provisions and the passenger facility charge?
Yeah, the passenger facility charge is currently, because as we talked about, they're non-federal revenues. They are not subject to the same guidelines of the DBE program as the AIP program. And one question that we have heard from DBE contractors is, shouldn't those same rules apply to the passenger facility charge in light of the fact that it is effectively a federal authorized program? That is a fair question. That is one that we are studying as we're looking to putting a reauthorization proposal together. The airline or the airports in general as a community have not been supportive of an increase in the DBE program as it applies to passenger facility charges. And their argument is the flip side of the argument that I just made. While it's a federally authorized program, it is local revenue and should be subject to whatever programs exist at the state and local level. I think that what we can all agree on is everyone has a shared interest in increasing opportunities for disadvantaged businesses. And this is something that I know is going to be a subject of a lot of discussion as we figure out where we're going to go with the PFCs, what level are we going to get at, and does it make sense to extend the federal DBE program to apply to them.
Thank you. Let me turn a little bit more to the surface side. One of the things that is a big feature, particularly the highway and transit programs, is research. And I think the tie-in there to DBE and contracting issues is very important. So, David, I'll ask you a little bit what the going forward looks like on the research front and what we might consider from DBE standpoint to move that forward.
Thanks, Jack. Before I address that, I want to put someone here on the spot. Today is Bob Prince's birthday. It's a big day for Bob Prince. So. Sorry, Bob, I couldn't resist. I had to do that. Research. Well, research is oftentimes an afterthought in the minds of a lot of people. And when it comes to highway research, it is critically important. And in fact, this morning at 11:30, President Obama will be at the Federal Highway Administration's primary research center, the Turner Fairbank Highway Research Center in McLean, Virginia, which is right next door to the CIA. And McLean is a suburb of Washington, D.C. He is going to be there to make the case that we need a bigger investment in infrastructure. And the reason he's doing this at the Turner Fairbank Highway Research Center is to showcase all of the great things that have happened, but also that need to happen to advance new materials, better pavement, longer-lasting bridges, vehicle-to-vehicle infrastructure, all of those promises in the future that will lead to safer, better, more durable, longer-lasting infrastructure on the surface side. And that's why we have a research center that does all sorts of advanced and applied research. And it is critically important. I cannot tell you how important it is. And again, unfortunately, it is oftentimes an afterthought in the minds of a lot of people. So we have to keep pushing on the research front that it really is about the future, and it's about tomorrow, and about a better infrastructure.
All right, let me turn for a moment again to the FAA, the Next Gen program. Michael mentioned it. I'd like him to elaborate a little bit on that program and what its implications are, particularly for the contracting world for the future.
Yeah. The Next Gen program is, we've been in a modernization program, as I mentioned, for a number of years. The FAA spends about $1 billion a year on Next Gen. That is in the form of what we call foundational technologies. We have significant programs to modernize the basic platform on which we operate the air traffic control system. And these are big computer systems, major tools that controllers use to help them safely separate air traffic. And we completed the build-out of a foundational technology called Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast just this past spring. So all of the country is now covered with this GPS-based technology that is currently being used to augment and supplement the radar coverage, and this has given us a lot of great benefits. The first is we now have radar coverage where we didn't have, or the equivalent of radar coverage where we didn't have it before. Places like the Gulf of Mexico or the mountains in Colorado or the northern plains, Minnesota and the Dakotas, which gives us a great deal more efficiency. The other thing that it gets us is the ability to fuse the reads we get from these additional sensors with existing radar to give us a much more precise view of what's happening in what we call the terminal areas. That's the airspace around major airports. And this enables us to greatly accelerate a program called performance-based navigation. Performance-based navigation gives us an ability to instruct aircraft to fly much more direct routes arriving and departing airports. And what this means is they are flying fewer miles, they're often descending with the engines at idle, as opposed to we've all experienced it. When you're coming into an airport, you hear the airport's throttle up, throttle back. And what the airplane is doing is it's actually going down the stairs. It levels off, descends, levels off, descends. In aviation terms, that is the equivalent of stop-and-go driving in traffic. It is very, very fuel inefficient. And so as a result of these investments in technology, you can now, instead of going down the stairs, slide down the banister. And you are doing this with the engines at idle. Secretary Fox was on a flight to Houston a couple of months ago where in Houston, we just turned on a new program called Metroplex where we introduced all on one day 61 new procedures into the greater Houston metropolitan area. Every one of these is one of these glide approaches. It's called an optimized profile descent. Secretary Fox was a little freaked out when it sounded like the engines went off as they were descending to land into Houston. And we explained to the Secretary that that is exactly what an optimized profile descent is designed to sound like. It is way cool. You come in steep, you come in on a glide with very little fuel burn and equally important, very little noise. And so these are the benefits that we're now starting to see. We're going to turn on a similar program in North Texas this fall, Northern California next spring, Southern California, Washington, D.C., here in Atlanta, Charlotte, North Carolina. We have these teed up all around the country. And so these are the benefits that are now being deployed. Now, what are the opportunities for disadvantaged business contractors? The FAA has a three-part disadvantage program. Many of you are familiar with our construction program at the airports. There's also an airport concession program. But I think the other thing that we also want to make sure that people are very focused on is that $1 billion that we're spending on NextGen, the FAA's own contracting, where we've had very rich and very diverse DBE participation from engineering firms, from planning firms, from firms that enable us to actually design new procedures, and they work in partnership sometimes with larger organizations. But it's a great program. It's a very ambitious program, and we've been pleased by the DBE participation so far, but we want to see it increase.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, I'm glad to get that information because I actually would have probably told the secretary, you didn't expect us to try this out on the public, did you, without you? And that's actually very informative. I'll keep that in mind when the engines sound like they're shutting down. Clearly, in the highway world, the states and locals play a major role in advancing programs and also our DBE programs and other activities. How do you see that currently going, and what do you see going forward as opportunities to enhance that partnership relationship?
You all know that DBE programs, as James pointed out, are based on disparity studies to show, to indicate through data, that there is current and ongoing discrimination against small businesses and women-owned businesses in most arenas. One of the things we have enjoyed under Secretary Fox's leadership and under the President's leadership is this notion of research in the sense of justifying and continuing to justify our needs as a nation. So this year, we were lucky that Federal Highways worked with the Transportation Research Board to conduct a study of DBE programs to see where we are nationwide. And it was primarily focused on Federal Highway, but through their cooperation and the cooperation of FAA and FTA, we're expanding that study to look at all DBE programs in all modes so that in the end we can say this is valid research done to show where we are and where we're going. And while we've got all our practical applications and contracting and all of the issues we have with enforcing the DBE program across the nation, we're also have an eye on justification and an eye on validation. So I just want to let you guys know that, because the naysayers will always say, you don't have the evidence, you don't have the evidence, and we want to make sure that with numbers, we also have anecdotal and we have qualitative evidence to show that this is a real need. So I just wanted to throw the research piece in to let you know that we're mindful of that.
Appreciate that.
Thank you.
James, you wanna-
I would just echo everything that Camille said. We have the DBE program, but it is constantly under legal attack. We almost take for granted that we have a DBE program. $40 billion or so comes through the three modes with DBE programs, and so over $4 billion goes into disadvantaged businesses, and we kind of think that that's just the way it goes. But in any given time, we're working very closely with the Department of Justice. I am frequently in touch with the Department of Justice because we've got about 5 or 6 lawsuits right now filed against our DBE programs, the existing DBE programs. Some people think once we do a disparity study, it showed it and everything is good. The Supreme Court has said, no, you need to look at that on a very frequent basis, because once any support you have for past and ongoing discrimination is over, you need to stop these programs. So you don't automatically get them. So every time we do a Surface Reauthorization Act, we say we need to continue with our DBE programs, and we give tons of disparity studies, tons of evidence of the continuing need for these programs. So we often talk about the things we're doing, and Camille and her shop and the different civil rights administrators are doing a great job. But in the legal offices, in the Department of Transportation, as well as in the Department of Justice, we are continuing to fight legal battles every single day.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to ask probably one more question. I'll let our panelists know now that one of the things I'm going to give them an opportunity to do at the end after we hear from the audience is make any summary points they would like to make about what we've discussed today, so you might be thinking about that. And the remaining question I want to ask really deals with, for all of the panelists. What are we doing to integrate, particularly, I think it's more for the surface modes, to integrate the surface modes of transportation as a system as opposed to, I'm going to use the term of art, stovepipes, which is an important thing to bring about change in. So let anybody kick that off that would like to.
I guess I'll take a quick shot at it. We are increasingly viewing the transportation world as an intermodal world. And so a lot of the grant making we do, a lot of the way, if you look at the Grow America, we really try and synthesize it and talk about what transportation means across all modes. In our Tiger grant process, we are looking at and have a priority for intermodal solutions. So how do we deal with the railroads and trucking going into a port? How do we address a coming together at an airport, for example, where you've got a car rental facility? How do we get mass transit into the airport? And thinking about that globally as one big transportation project, as opposed to there's a transit piece, there's a FAA piece, there's a roads and highways piece. So that's a great question. And at the Department of Transportation, we are continuing to look at our different modes as a group and how we can have intermodal efficiencies.
I will mention two things. The first is that the Federal Highway Administration is more than just about highways. It's really about all streets and roads. So for example, bicycle and pedestrian improvements, complete streets, road diets, those kinds of things that are being done at the local level now are being fully supported by our agency. And we have a lot of tools and resources to help local communities that want to pursue those types of improvements. Again, bike and pedestrian, complete streets, traffic calming measures, all of the things that are useful and helpful to help enhance a local community. The second thing I'll mention is that on the freight issue, we haven't really talked much about freight, but this is a huge issue in the surface world, given the fact that America's population is going to grow dramatically between now and 2050, and given the fact that our economy is growing and that more and more freight will be transported around the country, we really need a multimodal and robust freight system. Up till now, freight has oftentimes been seen as a highway-only system or issue. Not the case. Clearly, it is multimodal in nature. Freight moves by rail, by air, by pipeline, truck, you name it. It's very multimodal in nature, and that's what we're hoping to do in our administration's proposal to really advance freight as a multimodal system, robust across all modes.
In the same way, from the civil rights perspective, we are, I think, more now than at least in many years under President Obama and the leadership of Secretary Fox and of course the leaderships of our administrators, we really are working collaboratively across the modes to ensure that our DBE program is solid. And that is, as we'll talk more in depth at the next panel, has been absolutely, I think, pushing us to another level. And not just with the intermodal relationships, but also our collaborative relationship with OSDBU, our collaborative relationship with our general counsel, and also other agencies like the Department of Labor, as Warren Whitlock can tell you from Federal Highway, trying to use some of their enforcement muscle in terms of hiring people with our DBE program. So this collaboration across our modes in a lot of ways is also enhancing our civil rights efforts.
Michael?
I've been involved in this integration question for probably 25 years now, and including way back when in my previous stint at DOT, where I had a lot of involvement with the extension of BART to San Francisco International Airport. And one of the things that, when you are looking to integrate airport funds and surface funds, it becomes a little bit more complicated because of the jurisdictional issues that you have to respect between the various committees of Congress, as well as how the revenues are derived, but it is possible. And we are seeing significant interest on a lot of airports and transit authorities to work more collaboratively. Just this past week, we did complete our review of the Silver Line extension to Washington Dulles International Airport, and reached agreement on how airport and surface funds, as well as locally derived revenues, will be combined for the extension of the Silver Line out to Dulles Airport. The first phase is opening to Reston in a couple of weeks, and the airport's already planning for, okay, what's next? Likewise, a project in Orlando for an intermodal rental car, transit, rail facility at Orlando International Airport. The FAA has been involved in working closely with the transit authorities and the local transportation planning authorities to figure out how do we integrate those facilities in a better way, recognizing that they are funded in different ways, but how can we work creatively to figure out how we can improve the access options to airports. And I think that trend is only going to continue. And they're complicated projects to work through, but they're something that we find very important and we're very supportive of.
Thank you. What I'm going to do now is open the floor to all of you, and we would encourage you to ask your questions or provide comments. If you wouldn't mind coming to the mic in the center of the room and state your name and your organization, and then we'll try to address your questions.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Ed Swells. I'm with the Syndicate Incorporated. I'd like to ask a question. First of all, DBE, everybody knows, is very precious to most of the people in this room. However, when we start talking about intermodal, it seems to me that there is not just a question, but there's the rest of the world that's going far faster than we are in terms of high-speed rail, other avenues that we just don't even seem to dwell in. And I'd like to ask this question. How do we not only catch up but get ahead in that game? If anyone could supply, or if all of you could supply, some kind of information that you know of that will help us do that, it'd be appreciated.
Thank you. Open it up to the panel.
I want to make sure I understand the question. So is the question, how do we get more DBE participation in some of the, what I'll call new expansions like high-speed rail? There's a lot of money in the era funds that went to high-speed rail. The Grow America Act provides for approximately $5 billion in high-speed rail. Is that the question, and how?
Well, you said the proposal for Grow America, right? And it's a proposal to who? Who's the proposal to?
Sure, that's a great question. The Grow America Act is really a proposal to Congress because we have to have Congress to authorize the money. We like to talk about it a lot because while it is a request to Congress to fund, it really gives a blueprint as to what is important to the Secretary and to the President about how we move forward. So while it's a formal proposal to Congress asking for funds and the types of programs we'd like to run.
Let me ask you this. Does that mean it translates into being an act and passed by Congress?
That's
and signed by the
correct.
President?
Yes, that's exactly right. That would have to be passed by the House of Representatives. They, as David mentioned, they're taking it up. They took it up last night, and I think the Senate is taking it up this morning. We've asked for 4 years, but it would have to be passed by both houses, and then the President would sign it into law.
And, well, my question again is, that's the proposal. Should be signed by Congress. But at the same time, the global world is moving fast forward, doing other things like high-speed rail, which also we want to include DBEs within that. How do we catch up and get ahead?
That's a great question. And there are two pieces of it. There's a practical piece. There is a practical piece, and then there is a legal piece. And being a lawyer, I'll attack the legal piece very quickly. I mentioned earlier that we are doing a disparity study in FRA. One of the things we were very concerned about, and the Congressional Black Caucus was extremely concerned about, is that we had somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 billion in ERA funds that went specifically to high-speed rail. We did not have a DBE program. I was excited to learn that a number of disadvantaged businesses received contracts, but nowhere near the percentage we wanted to see, and we could not put a DBE program in because the Constitution says that you can't do an affirmative action program unless you're remedying discrimination. That's why we're very excited that we're working on a disparity study right now so that we can complete the disparity study and put a DBE program into rail, which is where high-speed rail would go. So that's an active step that we are doing right now. And the answer, when ERA came around, the answer was, we can't just put a DBE program in without a disparity study, and so we can't do it. Secretary LaHood started the effort. Secretary Fox is extremely excited about the effort to actually get the disparity study done so that we can, if discrimination is shown, put in a DBE program. So from the legal perspective, we're working on it. We're working on it right now, and we're working very hard. From the practical perspective, we need more disadvantaged businesses getting into the business, and it's not easy. I hear unfortunate stories about how the difficulties disadvantaged businesses face, even with existing DBE programs. But it's important for us to be in the marketplace, to learn the types of skills, to be involved, to start our businesses there, because we need willing, ready, and able disadvantaged businesses to exist in order for us to make the case. There are a number of resources that are available through OSDBU, and we can go through a list of those. I think we'll talk a little bit more about those on the next DBE panel. So there are a lot of ways we can help, and we can provide assistance to businesses that are trying to do that, even if we don't have a DBE program. So it's important for us to make inroads as businesses, whether or not we have DBE programs, and once we make those inroads, it's easier for us on the government side and on the legal side to actually put in programs that require that businesses that receive federal funding actually use disadvantaged businesses.
You're asking, I think, a two-part question as well. One is how do we divide the pie, but you're also asking the question, how do we grow the pie? Many countries are investing in dramatic infrastructure enhancements like high-speed rail programs. We just look at the sheer number of new airports and rail systems that are being developed in China, in India, in Latin America. And I'm not sure if this is what you're asking, but I think that there's also a question, how do we make the case for these kinds of investments here at home? We have a lot of investment that was made 50 years ago, and we have benefited from that legacy, and we have a responsibility to leave a legacy for future generations of an infrastructure system that is supporting of the economy. And what that means we all have to do is make the case and tell the story. Certainly in the context of aviation, it's not well understood that aviation represents $1.3 trillion of the U.S. economy, that it employs 10 million people. 10 million Americans work in the aviation industry each and every day. And that it's our largest export industry. It's an industry that was invented here in the United States, and it has needs. We need to invest in infrastructure. We need to stay the course on next gen. We need to ensure that our manufacturers of aircraft continue to represent the gold standard for safety and efficiency. And that is a story that we as transportation professionals need to be talking about in all aspects of transportation. Because fundamentally, an investment in transportation is an investment in America's future. It's an investment in our economy. And I think we all sometimes get caught in the trap that it works pretty well, and we lose sight of the fact that it's not going to work very well in a few short years if we don't take the time now to make those investments so that we can maintain our country's leadership position in transportation.
Thank you. Questions?
My name is Shirley DeLibero, and I am president of DeLibero Transportation Strategies, but I'm asking this question with my past CEO of transit authorities. My question is to Mr. Herta. I'm glad to hear about the all working together intermodally. does that mean that those transit authorities that are now trying to build to airport stations and put transit stations at airports can get some of that PFC money to support that? Because I know that was my fight in Houston, trying to get some of that money as I was building the rail system there.
It's very tricky, and we're very committed to working with an airport and a transit authority to figure out, because here's the problem we have to solve. By law, AIP and PFC funds need to be used for airport purposes. Now, in recent years, we've started to take kind of an expansionist view of that airport purposes can be defined as getting people to the airport. And so that means we need to make a finding that a transit line that is being extended to an airport, that its principal purpose and overwhelming ridership is to bring people to the airports. And this is where it gets a little tricky. Well, transit agency says, well, okay, but I want it to stop at 3 more places before it gets there. And people are going to get on, people are going to get off. And how do I comply with the law? Well, then we have to sit down and figure out how we allocate costs and how we can make a determination that there is some percentage of the ridership of that particular transit system that will be going to the airport. And how do we forecast that? How do we manage that? And then can we allocate capital costs appropriately? Now, this is a little broader determination. Typically, before we had been much more conservative, that we would draw the airport boundary line, and we would basically say everything on this side of the line, because it's sitting on the airport, is something that we can consider. What we're trying to do is figure out if there are other ways that we can look at it, but it does require a willing partnership on the part of the airport authority and the transit authority to figure out how to find a solution there. So the short answer, surely, to that question is we're willing to work with you to figure out how can we look creatively and expansively at it in order to help facilitate these projects within the framework of the law. What does the airport think of that?
Sir.
Good morning. My name is Shelton Russell of American DBE Magazine. And my question relates to DBE fraud. I read this morning that a Pennsylvania contractor was sentenced to jail time for DBE fraud. And I want to know the goal, mission to increase the policing of DBE fraud across the country. I know the states are responsible for the DBE program, but I think having the federal government very involved in making sure that states comply and that fraud is dealt with is something that's strongly needed out in the states.
Let me take it. That's, of course, I'll rely heavily on James to be factual, but this is another one of those collaborations where our double checks and balances within the Department of Transportation just relying primarily on numbers, and of course our relationships with state agencies. And we rely heavily on people like you. We rely on our small businesses, we rely on our advocacy groups, and we rely on people who are willing to pick up the phone and say, something's going on here. On the legal side, of course, the states and principalities also have their attorneys paying attention. So this is in the best interest of everyone not to allow that to happen, though it does. My sense is it is not, I have to defer to James on this, is that we concentrate mostly in my area on the positive sides of trying to get people jobs and not so much on the fraud side. But we do, of course, have a tremendous responsibility to make sure that's not happening. So I'm going to let James speak to what we do when we run into that, but we rely heavily on you and your eyes out there in the field.
That's well said. There are really kind of three components or 3 ways we go at it. The first is we as we try to allocate resources, what the civil rights officers do are the most important, which is making sure we certify the businesses, making sure that they're getting the contracts. There's a second piece that's very important, as Camille said, because we don't have, those of you out there know, we don't do, multi-audits across 50 different state DOTs, hundreds of transit authorities, very difficult. So we do rely on you to report, and please do, because that's where it often starts. We hear anecdotally about a lot of the issues, but they never really come into the administration. And I want to point out quickly, too, that your first step, if you realize there's fraud or something like that going on, is to go to the state or the grant recipient, if it's a transit agency or an airport authority. If you are not getting a response or nobody is responding to you, then you should go to the appropriate modal office within the office, within DOT. So Mamie Mallory is our civil rights administrator for FAA, so if there's an FAA issue, it should go into her office. Warren Whitlock at Federal Highways and Linda Ford at Federal Transit. Then we can start investigations. We have the ability to say, you have to comply with our rules and regulations. Our rules and regulations prohibit fraud in those types of instances. We can then launch investigations and look into what is actually going on. We don't rely 100% on you to do that. We do our reviews to make sure they're complying with our rules, but you augmenting is a very important step. Once we find information or evidence that there really has been fraud, we often turn it over to our Inspector General's office, and they actually pursue with the Department of Justice, with state AGs, actual criminal action. And so when you see someone being indicted or actual police criminal action being taken, as Camille pointed out, that would not be from within the DBE program. We oftentimes give the information and we start investigations, but those types of actual fraud enforcement is going to be through our IG's office, the Department of Justice, and the state AGs.
One more question? We have one more question out there. All right. Well, let me do this. Let me ask each of our panelists to do a short summary of key points they'd like to make sure were made here that may be helpful to you. So we'll start over here with Michael.
Okay, well, thank you, Jack. If you take one thing away, I think that I'd really encourage you to help us make the case for investing in America's infrastructure. And that infrastructure is more than just construction programs. It's the operation of something that is critically important for our country and for the economy. And we have struggled as a nation with being willing to make those investments in the long term. And that's why the President is at the Turner Fairbanks facility today. That's why Secretary Fox has been traveling around the country. It's to make the case that we as a country need to do more to invest in infrastructure. Somewhat more parochially, I would just like to say that the game's not going to be over when surface reauthorization is done, and we all hope that it's successfully completed next year, because we have a very important aviation reauthorization program coming up next year, and we look for your active involvement in working with us as we figure out what the future of aviation is going to look like for the years ahead. I like to tell our team at the FAA that we're at a pivotal time in aviation right now. We're making decisions today that are going to affect what our nation's aviation system is going to look like for decades to come. And on the one hand, that can be absolutely terrifying because you worry about getting it wrong. But on the other hand, it is extremely exciting because aviation has contributed so much to the country in its first 100 years, and these next 100 years are going to be very exciting indeed. Finally, I'd like to say a word about your former president, Julie Cunningham. Julie was a good friend. I worked closely with her on the Obama transition team, and I can't tell you what a warm and wonderful presence she was as we worked together to define a transportation agenda that we were able to present to President Obama and then Secretary LaHood and now Secretary Fox. And Julie was a tireless advocate for ensuring that whatever we developed as a transportation vision was something that reflected the view of all Americans. And that was something that she was extremely passionate about, and I was very privileged to work with her. And I think that I speak for all of us up here on the panel that she was very much a good friend and will be very badly missed.
We are at a critical point in time in our history in terms of infrastructure investment, and I will simply echo some of Michael's points. On the highway side, the interstate highway system is now middle age, and we all know what happens in middle age. Things start to fall apart. And so we have to make some big decisions in terms of the future of the interstate highway system. How will it survive the next 50 years, the next 100 years? And what are we going to do to rebuild the system? It's not enough just to repatch and repave and fix potholes. It has to be completely rebuilt from scratch, from the ground up, from below the surface. How's that going to happen? How are we going to do that? What kind of funding is necessary to do that? Those are the issues before us. And I think you all know, based on your own personal experience, that driving wherever you live, driving can be a challenge because of the condition of our roads. 54% of our roads are rated as poor or mediocre. And 1 in 4 of our bridges are either structurally deficient or functionally obsolete. It does not mean they're going to fall into the river tomorrow. It just means that they need some help and they need to be rebuilt and refurbished. And so we are really at a pivotal point, and this is the time to make those decisions. Previous generations before us built a fantastic world-class system, highway and otherwise. The question before us now is, what are we going to do as a generation for the generations coming up behind us?
James?
I echo everything that Michael and David has said. I think they've hit the most important substantive areas. As a lawyer on the panel, I would say we are steadfast in protecting the DBE program, ensuring that the laws are applied equitably. I would say be encouraged and move forward with great hope and aspiration. There are a lot of resources at the federal government and a lot of resources out of DLT, so I highly encourage you to learn more about the different programs that we have available. There are assistance centers, there are 10 assistance centers across the country, so you don't have to, you can either actually go into a center and learn about how we can help you with lending, learn how we can help you out with bonding. We have a number of initiatives. I'm excited about a women's initiative to encourage women to become more involved in the transportation industry. So there's just a wealth of information out there, and I'd love to see you all take more advantage of that.
Camille?
And just to say, in the anniversary year of the enactment of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, let me particularly over here, I see a very large group of very young people. We have to be vigilant. This is not going to ever be settled or the way we wish it to be, at least not in my lifetime, which is, of course, never mind. Anyway, but you know, as Michael echoed and everyone on the panel, that we have to be vigilant and we have to be almost in the face of people on these large bills. It's, of course, sadly true about civil rights. And we cannot let our guard down, ever. I said to you earlier, we were trying to, in Warren's words, hardwire the DBE program so it won't suffer the whims of political sway as we move forward, but that still requires us to be, and let me just say this, since Michael brought up Julie's name, we have to be Julie's, because she was in the face. And she wasn't gonna let it stop. She was here, there, everywhere, and that's what it takes for us to get our infrastructure moving, change, to pay attention to civil rights of all people. None of this is a zero-sum game. It is for all of us. And when people talked about, well, curb cuts were for people with wheelchairs, who uses curb cuts? We all use. We look for curb cuts so that we don't have to step up. And then when the bus drops in front of you, that's supposed to be for people with disabilities, but it drops in front of me. I had to turn around one day and say, where are the old people? And then I had to realize I'm the old people. So we have to pay attention and be vigilant always. This is what makes our democracy great. So let's always think, for those of you who knew Julie very well, be a Julie. And young people, find out what that means. Thank you.
All right, well, I'm going to give a couple of remarks here. I want to second everything that was said about Julie. Michael and I both had the privilege and the opportunity to work with her on the transition team. She and I worked actually on a whole thing dealing with training and skill supportive services, and there was nobody more passionate or more deliberative about making those things happen. So particularly I was saddened by her passing and continue to be. I also want to mention a very long-term champion of the transportation programs, both the aviation and the surface programs. So forth. Congressman James Overstar died suddenly here, about 2 months ago. He served 36 years in Congress. He was passionate on all of the transportation issues. He served at one point as the aviation subcommittee chair. He served as the chair of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee in the House. And probably if there's anybody who is responsible for things like, for example, the ICE-T legislation, the Air 21 legislation, I could go on and on and on. And I had the privilege of knowing him well, actually, for about close to 50 years, and back before he was a congressman. And again, somebody that we should recognize and celebrate, who made what I consider to be tremendous contributions, most of which will not be known to people outside the transportation community, but certainly should be celebrated, recognized, and putting ourselves in a position going forward to try to emulate that kind of behavior that both Julie, the standards she represented, the standards he represented. And with that, I want to ask you to help me thank the panel members, and we'll go forward.